your science to use, the case for science-based deep tech startups. We have with us Dr. Premnath, who's head NCL Innovations at CSIR National Chemical Laboratories, Pune. And he's also the founder director of Venture Center, the incubator arm of NCL. It's a national award-winning inventive enterprises and deep tech incubator. Dr. Premnath is a technology developer, innovation and incubation manager, a startup mentor, and a co-founder of two medtech startups. Indeed, a multifaceted personality. One of its inventions, a breakthrough material for hip and knee joint replacements, has been implanted in more than 1 million patients worldwide. Another technology for porous maxillofacial implants has been implanted in thousands of patients in India and abroad. He has provided leadership for teams that have won national awards for technology development, intellectual property management, and business incubation. He is a chemical engineer by training and an alumnus of MIT in the US and IIT Bombay. He also received a Distinguished Alumnus Award from IIT Bombay during 2022. And he has been a Cherling Technology Enterprise Scholar in Cambridge, UK. So I'm sure you will have an interesting deliberation today with Dr. Premnath. Thank you, Dr. Premnath, for readily agreeing our invitation and being here with us this morning. And look forward to an interesting session on this important topic. Over to you, Dr. Premnath.
Thank you, Bala. Thank you for inviting me. And I hope you can hear me clearly, right?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, good. So can you tell me how much time I have, and I can accordingly.
We have planned it for an hour, so
okay.
You could divide between your talk and interaction accordingly as per your convenience.
Yeah. Can you alert me as I run out of time?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, great. So thank you so much again, Bala. It's a pleasure always to talk for especially aiming specifically meant for VIT, and also Bala has done a lot of good work for the Indian ecosystem, and I'm happy to contribute to his efforts as well. So let me continue with this. What I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about science-based deep tech startups and give you my perspectives on it with some insights and some data. And when Bala had written to me, he had talked about converting research into wealth. And I requested a change in title because what I find very often is that many of the technology developers and researchers are actually motivated a lot more by seeing their science in use. And, wealth often becomes a byproduct of it. So that's the reason that I have titled it this way. I'm part of the National Chemical Laboratory, had a division called NCL Innovations, and Venture Center is actually an independent not-for-profit incubator hosted by the National Chemical Laboratory. I have a few slides here which I have borrowed from especially Oren Hershowitz and Ashley Stevens from the US, which I'll just to show you some US data as well. So I'm basically an engineer, and Bala has given me given an introduction, but I just wanted to tell you that my perspective is a little bit tilted towards biomed products. I do have a tilt as an inventor. So I look at it a little bit from that side, although I've been a facilitator, mentor, and also as an entrepreneur in that sense. But I'll speak today for all of you as hopefully a fellow inventor as well. So this session is meant for researchers, faculty, and research students. Maybe some of the technology managers would also benefit from it, but it was aimed more at this category. A few key messages which I want to convey during this talk, and I'll try and show you why I'm saying this. First of all, I think every researcher, as I said, wants to see his or her science put to use for larger and more important purposes. And impact is a great motivator. So the big question is, how do we create impact with our science and technology? And if you're successful, wealth is often a byproduct, and that's great to have, in my opinion. It gives you a lot of freedoms to do whatever that you wish to do. um, but the real while that is a great motivator, it's also very challenging. The act of translating technology is not easy, and there are many reasons for it. And basically, in my opinion, the most important things you see is that very often many things need to fall into place for success, for a technology to be translated and hit the market, and which basically means that you often rely on an ecosystem to make it happen. And very often it's also a portfolio game, in the sense it's not about single shots at the target, but it's a portfolio activity that you have to think about, and which is hard for some researchers to digest. And every story is different, which means there's no real formula. You have to work on every story separately to make it happen. And this particular challenge is something which is not only an India problem, it's a global problem. Wherever there are, sorry, was there a question?
No, Premnath.
Okay. So wherever, you have seen success stories coming out of science being converted into products and services, you will find that they have managed to make the ecosystem work. And whether you talk about the Bostons of the world, Silicon Valleys of the world, or Cambridge areas, or some places in Sweden, and so on and so forth, or Israel, they have tried to put the ecosystem together. And despite that, in recent years, even in the best of places, startups are becoming the preferred vehicle for cutting edge areas. And you can see this happen in the US in a big way, and I'll give you some examples as well. And even in India now, there are quite a few role models and examples available, and paths are being charted out by people, and the lessons to be learned from that. And I hope to share a few, but and I'll close with some pointers on how to get started with this activity. And some of you as researchers at VIT may want to explore this as a way to deliver impact, to basically realize what you think is a full potential of your ideas. So I'll start with a short, brief introduction to this mRNA vaccine story. This came out in Nature last year, and it's basically, if it's a good read if some of you want to read it. If you look at the mRNA vaccines, which of course you've been all hearing in the news, both Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccines are mRNA vaccines. There's an interesting chart in that article which I wanted to point you to. You'll notice a few things. One, that the whole journey with mRNA started in 1960s, and some of the technology, insights and why people are pursuing that sort of started to shape up in the 90s. And then in around 2005, there was a breakthrough of a modified RNA, which basically evades immune detection. And this particular thing, of course, is a very key discovery that might be a Nobel Prize winning work in the near future. But this is something which happened in 2005. While that was happening, parallelly, there was another line of work which was happening on lipid-based delivery systems. And a lot of people were working on liposomes for vaccine delivery and so on and so forth. And somewhere around 2000s, you start seeing certain lipid nanoparticles being used, and then scalable methods for manufacturing lipid nanoparticles as well, around 2005. Now, this obviously wasn't research papers, and there were people who were tracking it. So there were people at this time who could see the potential of this. And that's a lesson. First thing to remember is that a lot of startup activity is actually driven by foresight. And you can start seeing the first startups coming around that time, with CureVac being founded in about 2000, BioNTech coming up in 2008, and Moderna coming up in 2010. So clearly at this time, people wouldn't, in general circles, wouldn't have bet, but somebody who was following this closely, not only following mRNA, following also the developments in lipid nanoparticles, connecting the dots, putting them together, and seeing the potential for its use in therapeutics and vaccines, was something which somebody had to see and notice and take action on and commit themselves to it. So a couple of lessons from this, and of course by 2020, you know what happened, and we have products out there in the market as well. But there are some messages out here. One, that when you're working in cutting edge science and cutting edge research, you are actually very well positioned to see the future. Only thing is you have to be willing to see the future, right? So the foresight part is important. You have to be willing to take that leap of faith, willing to see the potential, and there'll be a lot of naysayers, and you have to basically work despite that. You also need to build those vehicles early enough if you want to have a chance and a good shot at success. If both these vehicles were not created, probably would not have the mRNA vaccine today, because they would not have been ready to deploy or create the vaccine and deploy it at a very high speed as well. There are a few more lessons I wanted to share with you. These are the two scientists who were responsible for the 2005 discovery of non-immunogenic nucleoside modified RNA. And clearly they have a good shot at the Nobel Prize very soon. But they wouldn't have reached very far if also it wasn't for people like, for example, these two people who founded BioNTech, who made it possible for somebody like Carico, this is the lady here, to actually take the ideas ahead into fruition, and somebody who created a space for her to work and also bet on that particular technology as well. While this was all happening, it's very important to realize that the persons who bet on this technology are very, very important. And they have a very lonely journey very often when you're building deep tech startups. So it requires a lot of conviction from people to stay the course. So here, for example, is a quote from the same paper of the founder of CureVac, getting shouted down by a Nobel Prize winner in the first row about how he thought all the work on mRNA vaccines and so on and so forth was all, as in the words of the Nobel laureate, completely shit, right? So this is the story of most entrepreneurs betting on something which is cutting edge, betting on something in the future. So foresight doesn't come cheap. It is a lonely journey for most innovators as well. So if you want to build some things out, you need to make that leap of faith into that opportunity, which is something which sometimes many of us are not able to do as well. This, of course, is the other team in Moderna, and Professor Langer is one of the key inventors as well, key founders of the company, and of course the backbone of the lipid nanoparticle technology, which forms part of Moderna. We were fortunate to have him speak in January at Venture Center. We're celebrating 15 years of Venture Center, and he kindly agreed to speak as well. So in this example, this is an example of a deep tech science-based startup activity on a cutting edge area. You can see that there is invention involved, there is novelty involved, there's deep science involved, and there is a futuristic opportunity which people are building upon. And the motivation when they got started must have definitely been the potential for impact, right? And by the way, if you look a little more deeper, you'll find that Moderna went through very difficult times. So clearly, to stay on top of it, it was not just about money, it was also about impact, right? So it's really very important to keep that in mind. Today, when they're successful, we can talk about it. But there was a fair chance that in 2019, some of these companies would have suffered badly and not made it, right? So let's talk a little bit about idea to impact. So here's some nomenclature that I use. When I say technology, I'm talking about a problem and a solution. When you're talking about a solution, you're talking about either a technical invention or an organizational process. Like when you talk about technology commercialization, you're taking it to market, basically the technology to market. Invention is a class of technology where there's novelty associated with it, a global novelty in it. And when you take an invention to market, it's an innovation, right? So that's the terminology that I will use. So basically, I'm talking about this journey out here from problem solution to a product in use. So the early part is what many of us work in research labs. We maybe work only on the problem, maybe work on the solutions. Some of us might want to connect them, find other people's solutions and borrow problems, put them together and come up with technology ideas, and then take it to some key proof of concept, publish the work, patent it, and so on and so forth. And very often life stops over there, right? But the real journey, the hard work actually begins after that. And this is usually much of the work. It is not only not linear, as simple as this, because you might go back and forth and it need not be as linear and untangled. It might be linked with many other processes happening parallelly, but it also consumes a lot of resources and time. And that is a great challenge for people. One other thing in this process, which is important for researchers to understand, is that this process is all about making a reliable product, which basically means that you have to make the entire process very boring, right? This should not throw up surprises. It should work the way you intend it to work. And that basically means that many of the researchers, their creative juices flow in the early part, but they lose steam in the later part because that they feel is not interesting enough for them. So the most important thing to consider here is, who are the people who will be willing to work on this journey and take it to market, right? And those people typically are the people who are really keen and committed to the product in use. That is the end of this journey. And finding those people is an important challenge for most researchers who want to see their product in use. So if you are in the left side of this flow, you need to find people who are really committed to products in use and work with them. And you need to really value them and understand that they are very valuable for your journey, and they're not secondary to your ability to come up with ideas necessarily. Okay, so just to reiterate, I've already mentioned innovation, but this is the formal definition of an innovation. Things that don't reach the market are not an innovation. And if there are many ideas which people create, never see the light of day, and that's the end of it. And so you never remember them either. Once you remember them are the ones which will hit the market. So if you want to see your ideas in use, you will have to run this journey. You'll have to walk along the path till the product in use as well. There are many different routes one can take to market. So you can, as a researcher, you may want to transfer it to an existing company or set up a new company. And there are other models as well. I won't have time to go through it. Let's take the first one. And whenever it works, it's great. In the US, many universities used to focus entirely on that. The complexion is changing. In Europe, the second is, especially in UK kind of environments, the second dominates quite a bit. And the first has taken a little bit of a backseat. In US too, the first is reducing in prominence. It used to be the most important part before. So examples of this, the first one where academics, research, researchers licensing it to a given company. Examples are, for example, University of Wisconsin-Madison and their tech transfer entity called WARF, licensing out vitamin D technology or primate embryonic stem cell technology. And by the way, WARF happens to be the earliest tech transfer office in the world. And Stanford, for example, licensing out recombinant DNA and so on. On the other side, you could think of startups coming up with ideas as well, right? So the poster boy today is Elon Musk, but Google also is an example of that. Technology started with something which was created in Stanford, licensed out to Google, and then converted into a startup, which today, of course, is very prominent and is a leader in the space as well. So these are the two options that one is talking about. Why would you choose one versus the other? So let's talk a little bit about that. So this tech transfer, where you transfer it to a bigger company, works very well in some cases, right? Whenever there is somebody who's a taker and who's very interested. And in NCL's case also, with parent organization I belong to, we have had success stories as well. For example, some of these products have NCL technology in them, and there's industry coming and there's a handover happening at some point and they take it and run with it. But this doesn't always happen. There's a mismatch in terms of expectations, in terms of trust, in terms of what their market goals are, and what you are producing, and what your academic and intellectual goals are, and so on and so forth. So when that happens, and your ability, your vision of the future is different from, say, what industry partners think, what do? You don't have too many options, and you have to look at other options. And that's where people start creating startups and spin outs and so on and so forth. And this is especially so. The classic example of this, which you must have all read about in the past, is of course Alexander Graham Bell setting up a precursor to AT&T, Bell Labs, many years back, out of Boston University, and setting it up as a company because he wasn't getting the value that he thought he should get for his technology. And also he didn't think people who were wanting to license it were people who could see the full vision and potential of what he was building. Of course, today, it seems so ridiculous that people miss that opportunity, where every person has a phone in their pocket, and all that all began with Alexander Graham Bell and his story with this. These are some examples from NCL, which we have been trying to build as spin-out companies. Invariably, they are forward-looking. There's a foresight about the opportunity in the future, and we are working towards it and hopefully creating value over a period of time. And eventually, by the time industry wakes up, we should be ready and maybe even disrupt the industry if we are very successful as well. So I'll leave that there. Now, the second part of the story I want to tell you is about I just want to relate, give you a few comments which might resonate with you on the fact that impact interests all of us, and I'm sure it interests you as well. When I look at myself, this is what interested me when I thought of getting into biomed technology. It is satisfying to see people empowered by the solutions that you develop. But of course, today, all the new global role models all have startups and spin-outs. And why are they doing it? Because they think that that is what is going to really result in the true potential of the technology being realized. So for example, 2018 Nobel Prize winner Frances Arnold has several startups. She works on enzymes and a lot of industrial biotech kind of problems. Jennifer Doudna is a pioneer in CRISPR, has several companies which are developing technologies. They were in the news recently because of this lawsuit on CRISPR patents. I told you about Bob Langer, one of the co-founders of Moderna. There's more than 40 startups. Venture Center was opened by Professor Richard Friend, the Cavendish professor at Cambridge, who again has several startups as well. And of course, all of you are familiar with people like Amar Bose, professor at MIT, who went on to start Bose Corporation, and many of you might be using the speakers as well. And I've talked about the BeyondTech founders as well. So today, these are the new role models that our researchers are seeing, and seeing them as ways by which people are creating more impact through their work. And these are the kind of models they might wish to pursue as well. Here is another data set, say from Oxford University. This is spinouts from Oxford University. Oxford, of course, was traditionally always good in academics and scholarship. And in recent years, you'll see a big spurt in the number of spinouts, right? And there's been a concerted effort to do that, because again, they are seeing that that is the way that they can really deliver impact through their science and research. There were some spinouts coming out in between, but sometime around 2014, Oxford decided to set up a very large investment fund, which is of the tune of, I think, about $500 million US, which is aimed specifically at spinning out companies from based on Oxford technologies and so on and so forth. So this is clearly something which, is an indicator today of also the innovation capacity and the innovation intensity of research universities. So this is another motivation for many universities and researchers to pursue that as well. This is some data from the US Autumn, which is Association for University Technology Managers. And you will see that there's enormous value being created from university research. And just if you look at just the sheer gross industrial output contributed to, it's enormous. And it is something really, really important. By the way, one should keep in mind that this is the eventual impact in society, right? The tech transfer revenues are a very, very poor proxy to the overall impact that tech transfer and value creation from research really delivers in society. And this excites a lot of people. It excites me too. I would like to see such clusters in India and many different places, which are creating societal wealth and value and products, useful products for our country and the economy as well. Some people have a problem with this whole idea that you need to create wealth from knowledge, and I want to address that head on. It's important to understand that research is funded either through profits or through taxes, and taxes are also funded through profits, right? And it's really one has to be very clear about it, that if you don't have profits, if you don't have surpluses that the businesses are creating out of the work that you're doing, there is no way you can fuel innovation. And therefore you will not be able to sustain innovation. As India aims to be an innovation driven economy, this virtuous circle is going to be really, really critical. So it's quite important that some of these ideas that we are working on in research environments are converted into products and services, and eventually deliver profits, deliver taxes, which again fund this activity, and this we can somehow build this virtuous circle in a more sustainable manner. But that said, what motivates entrepreneurs eventually, this is my observation, is not necessarily, the first item is not necessarily wealth. It is very often realizing one's full potential. So if you talk to some of the entrepreneurs who are building some things, they go through such tough times in the very beginning that I always wonder what motivates them. And my observation is that it's always about realizing one's full potential. They're not happy with the mediocre kind of achievements that they might be having in other activities. They think they are worth more, that they can do a lot more, they can achieve more, they should be visible more, and so on. And that drives them into entrepreneurship. And of course, there's a mission sometimes behind them of saving lives or improving conditions, or personal stories that their family suffered and they want to do something about it, and so on and so forth. And money is always good when it comes to giving you freedoms and to pursue what you wish to do as well. So keeping this in the backdrop, let's talk a little bit about what is known about this process of technology commercialization. So a few lessons that I have pulled out of just to talk here today. The first one is that, as I told you, much of the hard work and time follows after the invention. So if you've just done some work, published it, patented it, and so on and so forth, that's not enough. Much of the work actually is going to follow after that. And it's important to understand and recognize the importance of technology translators. And if you don't do it, you do it at your own peril and cost. As an inventor, you need to partner with people who are technology translators. As an institution, you need to understand the importance of technology translators and reward them, because without them, you're not going to have impact as well. So it's quite important to realize the importance of people who are bridging this gap, is 80% of the work that is involved in taking things to market as well, right? It's not only about celebrating only the early part of this process. If you don't do the rest, you're not going anywhere anyway. An example of this good story to read is one of penicillin. We all talk about Alexander Fleming and his invention of penicillin, but in 1928, if the whole process had stopped with him, we wouldn't have had the first antibiotic. It was actually in 1938 that Professor Florey, Ernst Chain, and Heatley came up with further work, which essentially advanced the technology. And this was painstaking work done because whatever was demonstrated by Fleming was at a very, very preliminary stage, and it had to be advanced significantly to get it to a point where it could really produce adequate quantities for testing. And furthermore, and so it's only in 1942 that it was really the first civilian patient was treated, and this was all possible because of all of these people. So Nobel Prize does recognize, along with Fleming, I think Florey and Chain. I think unfortunately Heatley was left out, but nonetheless, at least it did recognize these contributors as well. A second lesson is about gaps of perception, of value, and that's very common. And one other general lesson, a corollary to this, is that it's very hard to predict winners. There is no evidence that people have been successful in predicting winners. So that basically is an important thing to keep in mind if you are thinking about how to advance your technology. One approach could be, you can imagine betting everything on one, or advancing a few and seeing which one you want to take ahead. And this has also got a lot of relevance to how university managers need to think, or how incubator managers need to think. It's a mistake very often to try to predict winners, and there's no evidence that that is possible. Okay, so this gap is what I'm talking about. On the left side, there is academia, and on the right side there is industry, and there is a gap in between of what are the potential opportunities. Will it be big? Is it important enough? Is it important enough for us? How does it compare with my alternative investment opportunities? What are the risks? What are the rewards? And also that it was not made here, made by somebody else from somewhere else as well. So this particular gap is something which you will always encounter as a researcher. So you might need, but since you're in the field, you might have an additional foresight which may not be visible to the industry person. It's for you to communicate. But if it is not understood, not accepted, you may need to walk this distance a little further, take it further, so that people get a better sense of the value that you're creating, and also bet on you as well. So this is something which every researcher needs to inculcate, this habit of advancing it far enough that the gap is reduced in many ways. So I have told you about this, that it's not uncommon that people suspect what you're trying to say when you're working on breakthrough ideas. Let's talk about one other lesson, which is that supportive ecosystems are critical for ensuring that successful translation in that process. When you look at the same flow, you'll find that there are many, many other pieces of the puzzle that need to fall into place. And it's not just one or two things that are needed. The different types of funding, different types of stakeholders, different types of activities to be performed. And you, as a researcher, might primarily be focused on the left end of it. How do you bring this ecosystem together? Is it something which is available? Have you tried, have you seen if your ecosystem you're working in supports all of this? And how do you enhance that ecosystem? That is quite an important question for people who want to be in technology translation. So we follow at Venture Center, we take this very seriously. The innovation ecosystem, we think of it as, say, slabs crossing a pond, stepping stones. And if there are gaps, the idea is to close those gaps. And I'm sure that is what the VIT TBI is also trying to do, where they're trying to fill up those gaps and enable many of you to cross over to the other side and produce products and services out of some of your ideas. So this is something which you need to also look out for, not merely in your vicinity, but globally as well sometimes, because ecosystems are different at different stages of a company. They're different for different types of technologies, and you need to know how to pick and choose and make the best use of different types of ecosystems that are available to you. This is a very common thing you see in many accelerators also around the world, where they leverage a particular ecosystem for a particular technology and a particular activity as well. A related point to the fact that you cannot pick up winners very easily is that innovation is very often a portfolio game of numbers and odds. That you have to be clear that not everything you bet on will be successful. So you need to have a portfolio in approach in front of you. And I always tell people in the university environments that, when you invest in research and when you invest in innovation, don't treat it like a production process. It is not a manufacturing process. It is to be treated like how you invest in the army, navy, or air force. You don't know when the war is going to happen. You prepare for it, right? You create options for yourself. It's very similar to that. You have to basically work on creating options and fueling those options far enough till you can put it to use as well. And why am I saying this? Here are some numbers from the US. Okay. If you look at the US universities, we hear a lot about how productive they are in terms of technology, translation, and so on and so forth. But one must keep in mind that the base on which they're operating is very, very large. Okay. So if you look at research funding, you're talking about $809 billion. Please remember that to give it to context in the Indian sense, the whole budget of the CSIR and 37 labs is about 5,000 crores, less than $1 billion. And the 1 year budget of, say, a university like Johns Hopkins will probably be about $2.5 billion. Okay, one university. So you have to understand that the research intensity is very high, and therefore you can see a lot more productivity coming out of it. So they have a large pipeline which is fueling what is coming out. Now, this does not mean that we cannot do better in India. We may be able to do it better, but I'm just trying to tell you that it's a portfolio game. That means you need to have a large funnel which narrows down over a period of time. And in certain domains, it's very, very clear that is indeed so. I'll show you another example as well. And there's a filtering process, and at the end of it, you have, say, so much value being created as well. So in the US, for example, for every new startup, it's almost $10 million of research expenditure for around 0.15. So let's say 1.5 startups for $100 million of research investment that they're doing. So it is very, very, you must understand that there is a lot of investment going behind those kind of productivities, right? And this funnel, of course, continues further as you progress towards the market. This should not depress you, though. It's not that we cannot do it. It is only that we should know that the odds, there'll be always odds, and it's a numbers game. We may be able to do it far better than them if required. Another general lesson to keep in mind is that out of all the inventions that are filed, very few actually see the light of day, and fewer still make any money. Okay, so if in this chart, these are patents which have basically earned more than $200 million. You'll find that there are very, very few, and you can see that the steep drop, and most of them in this range are earning very, very, very little, right? So a general point that I want to make here is, if you are in the business of technology commercialization, aim for impact and not necessarily to don't make a big thing out of tech transfer income. Okay, that is not a good indicator of the impact that you could be possibly delivering. Another challenge which comes up in this whole process is taking ideas to market takes time. And if you are filing IP, don't be in a great hurry to drop them. Timing is important, but it's unpredictable. So this also adds to the challenge over there. If you look at the US data, you will find that after years of disclosure, many patents actually, for example, here, the biggest blockbusters from Columbia University came started making real revenue only after 10 years, 8 years, 4 years, 10 years, and so on and so forth. So if you're taking a very ad hoc view of inventions, it is not a good idea. It is important that you can sustain it. So if you're in this business, you have to learn to build it over a period of time. Now, if you're a typical academic researcher, how can you sustain innovation in a particular domain long enough? One vehicle is a startup. Okay, and that is one more reason why I think startups are the way to go in many cases, especially cutting edge technology. There are this last, I think, lesson that I want to talk about is about the chasms or the valleys that are there in this process. You'll find that you have a lot of research funding, you're able to do some work in the early stages, but there's a gap between that and where the industry funds it. And that valley kills many ideas, and many ideas languish in that space. And this is where you need to fill up gaps, and your incubator can help you do that as well. And I'll show you a little bit of how that ecosystem gets filled up over a period of time. So when we look at innovation, what I recommend to people is to look at it as a sequence of de-risking steps. That means you take an idea and progressively de-risk it over a period of time, and the value keeps increasing. And some of them will fall away along the way as you fail, if you have serious failures. So you have a pipeline, you advance them as much as you can with the resources you have, and see which one flies, and then you can progressively bet better on which ones you want to invest more resources. And this, many of you who work in drug development and chemistry are very familiar with the odds which in the drug development process. That's an example of this. This is a chart which shows from drug research to a regulatory approval how much time it takes, what is the cost, and what is success probability. You will see that this whole process is taking about 12 years, which means that the person who's investing those 12 years needs to be very sure that they have protected the patents and have plans such that after the 12 years, they're making enough money to sustain this effort. The cost, you can see, is increasing with phase 3 being the highest. So as I told you, the much of the hard work, resources happens in the later stage, not in the very beginning of drug research and discovery. And the probability of success increases progressively as you go ahead. And this is an illustration of the graph I showed you before, which is this: as you reduce risk, the value keeps going up, and the success probability also keeps going up. And you can see it in the valuations of these companies as well. Now, bridging these chasms, this is where certain grants are quite useful. So one of the roles which government grants play, and which many of you might be familiar with, like the Biotech Ignition Grant and so on and so forth, of the government of India as well. And in the US, the Small Business Innovation Research Grants and so on and so forth. They play a very important role in sweetening the internal rate of return for investors. That is, if you are going in the red in the beginning and coming out when you're positive, the initial part, you can reduce your risk considerably through a grant, and therefore make this whole process attractive enough for investors and entrepreneurs to participate in. If this was not there, this red box out here, people would find it extremely unattractive compared to the other alternatives available to them. So this is what a grant does. And today, fortunately, in India, we have built a portfolio of grants in India. In the early days, there were only this, 3 Fs, which is friends, families, and fools funding. People who trust you, basically. This things in orange on the top were all that was only available to people. So first generation entrepreneurs, people who were first generation into business, especially from middle class India, people who are coming from knowledge worker backgrounds and so on and so forth, could really not cross this chasm out here. Today, there is a lot of funding available in the very early stages out here, these green ones that you see, which has made it possible to at least push it to, there are of course still difficult zones in India, okay? But that said, there are funds available at different stages. And in this, BIRAC's funding programs are especially valuable because they go across stages. So BIG, SPARSH and AIR in the early stages, followed by SBRI, followed by BIPP is one sequence. And of course, the seed funds and the leap funds and all of those come in as well to support some of these startups and to take it ahead. So this has changed the game and made it possible for startups to really take ideas far enough without having unsurmountable barriers in front of them, which used to be the case in the past for first generation entrepreneurs. One last point, which is extremely important for researchers to understand, is that it's not about you, it's about a team. And innovation is invariably a team sport. It is not something which you can think of as you running alone. Invariably, it will require a team of people. And this is my favorite graphic for that. On the left is Usain Bolt running the 100 meters dash with a smile on his face. And that is what, is many of you might be doing in your research enterprise. But in technology and in innovation, it's like this right side picture of Kipchoge running a 2-hour marathon in under 2 hours with the help of 43 other world-class athletes who were breaking the wind for him as he ran. Now, all of these guys, you have not heard their names, and neither have I listed it here. But Kipchoge out here, who was in the news for doing the 2-hour marathon. But it was a large project of many people. So many of you as researchers might be one of these unnamed people in the front, whereas the star running the race might be the entrepreneur driving your startup. That's very difficult for some of our entrepreneurs to digest and to understand, but it's important to realize that and to work in that direction as well. I gave you the example of mRNA vaccine. That's the same here, right? Kariko works for BioNTech, by the way. She is an employee of BioNTech. The two founders are the ones on the right, and they are the ones who are driving the company and what it has achieved right now. If they hadn't done their job, neither would her ideas would not have got fuel, neither would they have reached where they have reached today as well. So it's important to value these people and help them run the race. A few more last few points. So when you talk about startups and spin-outs, a few general points. Startups are actually very different from small businesses and MSMEs. They look at future opportunities. Small businesses may look at current opportunities and want to build something on the, just a solution to address a current opportunity. But startups look at a future opportunity. That basically means that since the future is uncertain, there is a lot of uncertainty associated with it. And since you're imagining the future, there's often innovation involved in how you solve that particular problem. And invariably, you'll find that the opportunity appears small initially and becomes big over a period of time. And most people don't bother to look at it when it is small. And at that time, the entrepreneurs made fun of as being, some chasing a lost case, right? So you're a lonely entrepreneur at that time. Take EVs, for example. I'm sure when Elon Musk looked at it 10 years back, people must have thought he's crazy, or SpaceX, for example. But today, people are willing to ride along with him. But that time, it probably was quite, it required all his strength and courage and faith and resilience to stick out and do it, right? Now, because it goes from small to big in a short period of time, it scales. So scaling is a very important activity in startups, and an entrepreneur has a different mindset, and that is something which many researchers can understand, which is that they don't look at what is possible with the resources at hand. They actually look at what they want to do and then arrange the resources, and that is something which you can also learn to cultivate amongst you and your students if you're looking at building startups as well. And because it scales rapidly, you end up, of course, raising money. So startups have these typical features. And people talk about this hockey stick growth in startups. The big challenge here is we don't know when this inflection point is really going to happen. We will see the startup languishing here for many, many years and waiting for this to happen. At some point, this happens and they really take off at a sudden point of time. So, for example, Moderna was here. Moderna took off with COVID, and COVID nobody expected will happen as well. Now, the science-based ideas here basically leverage science for both the foresight and the solution, and that's where they stand out. But the issue here is that there's a lot of credibility involved that you need to create around the solution. There are a lot of key opinion leaders who you need to convince. There's a lot of data to be generated, a lot of progressive de-risking to be done. Therefore, the kind of resourcing you need to do is very different. So it's only in these kind of startups that you will have, say, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 kind of de-risking happening. And you cannot really sell anything until you have got regulatory clearances, for example, right? So this is a class of startups which have unique challenges, but they're also great for impact, in the sense most of the things which are very impactful fall under this category, be it health, be it energy, environment, agro, food, all of these sectors. You will find that these are the ones that most researchers will be excited by and would want to pursue as well. But it comes with additional risks. I'll close with a few examples of startups. Here are some examples, and I'm giving you the examples just to tell you that it's happening in India as well, and you can also do it, right? It's nothing new, that it's not completely out of the blue that one is talking about here. These are some startups from the Venture Center portfolio. I just want to point to a couple. Of course, you might have seen this ad of Akshay Kumar with the COVID self kit, and the startup MyLab, which basically beat very large MNCs to the first approval for the RT-PCR kit in India. This is a 350 tons per day plant picture that you see on the top of a company of one of our startups in Pune, outskirts of Pune, which converts the city's organic waste into bio-CNG, and which powers some of the city buses in Pune. The first citywide demonstration in India, which is a basically the basis and the inspiration for the Satat program of the government of India, and several others out here. The first CTC technology, circulating tumor cell diagnostic solution, these hand crank defibrillators, spinal implants, so on and so forth as well. I think I'll skip these in the interest of time. Since there might be some chemists and biologists, I just want to leave you with one of our startups, which is in the therapeutic space. Clearly, this is very challenging, but here is a company which has successfully built on a new target, a new NC, built animal models for vitiligo, which is an autoimmune disease, this white patches that you see out there, raised money for it, and are currently in phase 1 trials. That is, you can see the timelines also, going from 2016 to 2022 to phase 1 trial initiation for a drug molecule. And this, I think some of your researchers might also be interested in. A few startups by young students. I hope there are some students in this audience. Just to give you, this is a company called KB Calls, which works on microbial colors. And these two people that you see here are fresh PhD students out of ICT Mumbai, chemical technology students who have built this company. They've gone on to, by the way, raise investor funds. And today, just recently, their colors were featured in the Lakme Fashion Week, which was a great, I think, achievement for them, and to see all that happen. This is an ICER Pune student who paired himself with a scientist from NCL to come up with 100% soil compostable products for food and fresh food packaging, food and beverage packaging. This is a BIG grantee as well. Here is this lady out here on the left is actually a young alumnus from the Defense Institute of Advanced Technology in Pune, who is working on a new technique for breast cancer screening. These two people that you see here are from the Manipal Institute of Technology, just finished their undergrads when they got started, and engineers who are working on this last mile vaccine delivery solution. I've told you about Aham Immune. This company out here, this is a young engineer working on disposing sanitary pads in a way other than incineration, right? So finding ways to do it. This lady out here was one of our youngest entrepreneurs, a student from who had just, I think she did her biomed from Sastra, working with an IT company, but then deciding that she wanted to get back to biomed. And she's doing a great job of building this company called Ediwords, based in Chennai. One of our grantees from BIG, and also an incubatee at Venture Center at the time. These are two PhDs working on inorganics. This is a bone graft substitute. The only company in India makes bioglasses, and including novel bioglass products, right? Just 1 minute. Here are some more examples: clean tech, circular economy, battery swapping. By the way, this guy here has now India's largest chain of battery swapping stations, and they started as EIR fellows at Venture Center. And at a time when nobody was willing to accept battery swapping, they were all thinking that it will all be fast charging only. Today, things have turned around quite a bit as well. A young engineer from IIT Bombay, working on intraocular lenses with the help of scientists, both from the US and India, who he has brought into the team as well. I should close on with faculty startups. This is a latest startup from Venture Center, which is focused on sodium-ion batteries. And this is a colleague from NCL, Dr. Manjusha Shelke, who is the founder of this company. Dr. Vilas Shelke is also a physicist and full-time pursuing the company. There's technology which has been transferred out of NCL into this startup to build this out as well. And there is a UK partner as well involved in this startup. And right now they are in the process of raising a round of money. Another colleague of mine who set up this company called Vivira, which basically into process technologies, and this is uses this principle of hydrodynamic cavitation. And this particular one won the BIRAC Innovator Award in 2017 and is being rolled out in several companies for especially improving digester performance and so on and so forth. I think with that, I'll stop with this last recipe out here. So if you want to do this, I think the only way is to jump in, right? So convince yourself first that it's worth doing. Usually you need founders with a burning desire to create impact. And that is the first things that you start with. And then look for full-time committed entrepreneurial team members who will work with you on this idea, who are committed to the end point. The problem needs to be large enough to solve, and you need to look at novel solutions clearly, new ways to solve it in a creative way. But do find ways to have some competitive advantage. Patents are one of them, right? You can have other sources of competitive advantage. And that is very critical when it comes to an investor deciding whether they want to invest money in your company or not, and whether they see how much risk they see in your company. It's all about convincing the whole world to invest in your ideas, right? As a researcher, right? Everybody needs to rally around you to build that out. And you need to convince them that that's worth doing. A business model that's scalable. And then of course, you need to raise money. And typical startups of this kind will probably rely on grants and equity and maybe some sales. But usually you don't do debt in such kind of startups. It's more of driven on grants and equity. And as I showed you, all those options are available today. And of course, use a supportive and resourceful ecosystem. So in VIT today, Dr. Bala is here. And you of course have your BIRAC BioNest as well. That's great ecosystem to start off with and build your company. And of course, over a period of time, you as you grow, you should of course look, including, suppose you're in therapeutics, invariably you will be looking overseas as well in order to build your company. So this is, I'll close here. This is my contact details. If people want to write to me, you're welcome to write to me. So sorry, Bala, I think I took 1 hour full, but if there are questions, I'll take it. Otherwise, we can close. Yeah?
No, absolutely. It was pleasure listening to you as usual, Premnath, and you covered a wider ground, quite informative. And I'm seeing a question already, but we'll take few questions and then close the session if it's okay.
Yeah.
Sayanthini is raised a question: how to collaborate with scientists or research institutes for mentorship and interns, etc.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's a follow-up to that. When one is building a product, should one file the patent in one's own name or create a company and have a patent file in the name of the company? Okay, so this is a little, you need to think through this a little bit more. I'll try and give you a few simple answers, but please do discuss it with people who understand all of those issues. The first thing is, if you're collaborating with scientists in research institutes, typically most research institutes will have their mechanisms in place of how you can engage with them. So you need to first figure that out a little bit. In a typical CSIR lab, for example, there'll be different mechanisms that one can follow. If those mechanisms don't work, you can go and talk to the director to understand what are the options that are possible. So for example, in VIT, somebody like Bala can advise you on what are the mechanisms and options to pursue and how to take it ahead with a particular researcher, and there'll be people who facilitate that interaction as well. In the case of NCL, if you're a startup, Venture Center can facilitate. There's also a team in NCL that can facilitate that as well. So that's usually the way to do it. Internships and mentorship, I think the best way to is just ask first. Okay. And there are many cases where a lot of my colleagues generously support startups. The first thing is to do something, to participate in something which looks useful. So very often I tell people that make it useful, make the interaction with that scientist interesting and useful for them. That's your first priority. It's not about money necessarily. Okay. The first task is that people should feel happy about helping you, right? So focus on that. The rest will fall into place, but you need to follow institutional processes. As far as the patent goes, you need to understand this depends upon the agreements you have signed up to. So if you are an employee of an organization and you've signed a contract which has some IP clauses, the first thing is to read that and understand who owns IP. And then in that case, the IP gets filed in that person's, that company or organization's name. If you're a freelancer and you've not signed up to any agreements, you're free to file it on your own, right? If you plan to create a company and you want to file a patent, by the way, when you file a patent, typically as soon as you have enough information to file a patent, you should be filing, right? Because you don't want somebody else filing in advance of you, because in India, for example, it's a first to file system. That means whoever files first gets the patent. So you don't want to delay it too much. So you can file it in your name if you're a freelancer, and then assign it to a company when it gets created. Okay. And that assignment can be even free of cost, or license it to the company depending upon what you want to do with that patent. Many people, if they are freelancers, file as individuals, even because they think that will lower their costs. That means the cost of filing, maintaining patents and all of that is lower. So I think it's a case-to-case thing. You need to take a view on which way you want to go and typically I think that a typical startup grapples with many things. It's always better to keep it simple. When an investor is coming in, he will force you to assign it to the company, and that time you'll be scrambling around during due diligence, trying to do all this as assignment agreements and all that. So you should take a call on where you want to invest your time and money, and then decide for yourself. Okay. There's another question here, Bala.
From Shobha, you may take it.
Yeah.
Most of the funding are
yeah.
for projects which need a development period of more than a year. Are there any funding for scaling up or prototype?
Yes. So let's take an example. By the way, there are multiple funding pockets. Venture Center has a funding database which is available to everybody. It's called funding. I'll just type it down. You can all use it. So there are multiple funding pockets which you're all free to use. Okay. Funding.venturecenter.co.in. Now, let's take the case of BIRAC's programs, right? If you're a startup, the first proof of concept funding you might do through something like BIG, right? Biotech Ignition Grant. So that takes you till about, say, proof of concept. Beyond that, if you are, say, advancing it further, you need to do third-party test reports and get the thing ready for trials, for example, clinical trials. You could leverage something like SBIRI, which BIRAC supports as well, right? And if you're going to clinical trials and clinical evaluation, test the very large scale field trials and agro and so on and so forth, then you would probably go to something like BIPP. Okay, so this is the typical sequence. So there's actually funding line up quite a bit in different levels. But as you go to the right, which is amounts increase, the expectation from you to raise matching funds also comes in. And that's where you need to use seed funding and so on and so forth, right? So typically we tell people to leverage investments, early stage investments to match that funding and therefore get those fundings to take things ahead as well, right? So there is scaling funds available. You need to sequence them in such a way that it works for you as a company, and you need to know roughly what pockets of funding that you're tapping. SBRI, for example, is 50 lakhs grant, okay, but with a royalty clause with a cap, okay. If you're asking for more than 50 lakhs, they ask you to match it, right? So if it's, say, 70 lakhs, then you'll end up getting a grant of 60 and 10 coming from you, okay, and so on. BIPP can be very large. There's no limit to it, so it can go much further. If you're getting into manufacturing and so on and so forth, then you'll probably end up leveraging something like the product commercialization fund, which BIRAC has, or you might go for loans and so on if it's capex intensive, or you'll go for investments, okay. In typically at the scale of manufacturing, marketing, and so on and so forth, you will rely on investments of some kind or loans. You can't do it easily with just grants. Grants are for the early stage usually. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can chat.
Hello, Bala sir. Good afternoon.
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm Dr. Priyankar speaking from CBST.
Yes, yeah, go ahead. Dr. Priyankar.
I'm using my students' login. So, Premnath sir, very good. I mean, very clearly told that how we can step into the entrepreneurship. So, I'm a professor, full-time professor.
Yeah.
And a big dilemma what we used to go through, or our students used to go through, that whether we should go for publication or we should go for patenting. The problem is patenting process is a long process, and after only, say, we have some publication, then only we can go for research. We can publish it as a research article. But universities has all norms that when somebody is doing some PhD, they has to publish some papers to before presenting their work as a PhD work. So what kind of, I mean, in which way we think we should go for it when, some probable future product is there in our research work?
Yeah, so the first thing I should clarify to you is that there is actually no conflict. Okay, and let me explain what I mean by that. So the typical process you should be following is that the moment you have the earliest data which demonstrates, even one set of data which demonstrates an invention, you should be filing a provisional patent. Okay, and then you have 12 months to do the complete filing. So let's first understand the patent process itself so that you are very clear about it. So the first thing is, the way the patent process works is that the most important date for you is the filing date. Okay, it is not the grant date. Okay, so it doesn't matter, even if your grant comes 8 years from now, it doesn't have any influence on your patent. Okay, it is the date when you filed that is very important. Roughly about 18 months from there, is when it gets published. That means it is visible to the world that you have filed such a patent, right? And then, depending on the grant process, it might take 3 years, 4 years, whatever, to get it granted. Okay. And the government is today, excuse me, government is trying to reduce the timeline right now. So for you, the most important date is the filing date, because anybody who files after you anywhere in the world, as long as you are within the scope of the international treaties, cannot get that idea granted, because your patent will be prior to that. Okay, so the first important thing is that is the important date, right? The second thing to remember is, even if say if somebody copies your idea, the damages start from the date of publication. Okay, so 18 months from the first date that you filed. It's not grant, it is the date when it was filed. 18 months from there it's published. Anybody copies it, you can actually sue them for damages from that date. Okay, so the fear to people would be that you have filed before them, right? Correct. Now, so that's one part of the story. Second part of the story is, the actual filing cost of a patent is under 10,000 rupees, and True. You can do it yourself if you want. Okay, that's a different matter, that you might hesitate, you might think that the language is not appropriate and so on. But for a provisional patent, to quite some extent, you can do it yourself. And in the US, many inventors write their own patents. Okay, there is a risk to it. By complete filing, I think you must definitely try and get a little more skilled in it, but people do get skilled over a period of time. So neither time nor cost is a real factor in delaying your publications. Okay, so in the US, what typically people do is that they will just generate enough data for a good provisional filing. Okay, and immediately after that, you can go and publish. You don't have to wait for grant, you don't have to wait for the patent to get published, right? So where is the delay? So we tell people in NCL, for example, that even to get your paper published, you'll have to generate at least several months of data. Yes. Right? Now you take just the first instance of your invention and the first demonstration of it, right? That may be enough to do your provisional filing. Okay. So it's 3 months before, you just let your student do his publications in his timeline. Just ensure that 3 months before you filed a provisional, and that's easily doable.
Okay, thank you. It's a great help. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? I think, Bala, we are done then, right?
So thanks again. It was a wonderful presentation and a lot of insights, Premnath, on this important topic. It was a great honor hosting you today, and look forward to such sessions in the near future.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the great work you're doing for the ecosystem. So see you then. Yeah, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you all the participants for joining.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.